Should you buy Days Gone in 2022? Days Gone was a game that released to mediocre reviews, so when I first played this last year, recently playing through it again on PC, I was surprised by how consistent Days Gone was, whether that was the open world exploration, providing some pretty great immersion, broken by some bugs, or the consistent mediocrity of the narrative. Days Gone is one of the only Sony exclusives of the PS4 generation to be received more negatively when compared to the juggernauts of Uncharted 4 or Horizon Zero Dawn. We're not counting The Last of Us Part 2, because that for a bunch of different reasons. And it's easy to see why, but I think Days Gone was judged too harshly, mainly due to it releasing during a time which I think was the peak of people complaining about open world games feeling too long and like a checklist, and that criticism is very, very valid with Days Gone, but I think it was heightened because of the time it was released. Welcome to Classic Game Reviews. I hope this review helps you out and I hope you have a good time. How's everyone doing today and how was your experience with Days Gone? If you've already played it, please let me know. We've got to get the opinions going in the comments. Now, like all my reviews, we will start with narrative with no spoilers, along with a new section for soundtrack, and then slowly move into gameplay. Days Gone follows the character called Deacon. This is the guy you'll spend the entire game with, and it's clear the writers really wanted us to connect with him with the various plot points we go through with him, but unfortunately the pacing ruins any attempt to do so. Pacing is so incredibly important in story-driven games, especially open-world story-driven games, so if you don't get that right, the entire story is going to suffer. And the one thing that got hit the most in terms of Days Gone was Deacon. He has everything you would need to connect with the dude, in search of something he's lost, in hope to drag him out of the depths of his insufferable pessimism, but in an attempt to get that across, he himself is just boring and one note for most of the game because nothing really happens to change his character until you're 20 hours deep in the story, and at that point you've already got your opinion on him, so the pacing just drags him down. One thing I do want to mention was the criticism of the voice actor for Deacon, and I don't really get that. What the actor actually had to work with, I think he actually nailed the character of Deacon, but some really poor sound mixing always drowns him out during the cutscenes, especially during the last cutscene, the ending of the game, which to some is the most vital aspect of storytelling. So the main negative when it comes to that is simply lack of playtesting or just complacency when it comes to the sound mixing, because it really drowns out his character. Deacon is not a bad character, but his development overall leaves a lot to be desired, not because it sucks, but it just doesn't happen quickly enough, which is a very rare negative, because usually character development happens way too quick, but in this case it just takes way too long to change anything. And at the end of the day, we're all stretched for time when it comes to our consumption of entertainment, so you can get a story here, but you gotta be willing to put in the hours, and honestly, there are better stories out there with more interesting characters that is paced far, far better. Saying that though, there is clearly a lot of passion that's been put into the development of Days Gone, and while yes, it's another zombie game, there is very clearly a lot of effort that's been put in. The environments are gorgeous. It's rare you come across a section of the world that isn't heavily detailed or surrounded by just death, but not in the randomized sense, it's more of a controlled chaos, and that's difficult to pull off, but I personally felt immersed, so the developers clearly did something right if it wasn't for the bugs. Now the same criticisms for Deacon can be shared across the side characters like Boozer or Schizo or others that I can't spoil, but they tend to be there just to make it clear Deacon is not supposed to be this likable guy, as they all act far more emotionally and wear their hearts on their sleeve, which I personally really like. But the problem is it further exacerbates Deacon's character because of how damn depressing the guy is. And as I've said already, I think we would understand being sad and stuff like that, but when you're stuck with that character for 20 hours, it can get draining and you really feel it. You kind of just want some semblance of hope with this guy, and you do get it occasionally, but it's just not enough. Days Gone isn't helped by the generic zombie plot either. There is a certain section of humanity that has survived and are experimenting on zombies for a cure, which a good chunk of the game is dedicated to, but those sections I'll mention in gameplay because they leave a lot to be desired from a narrative standpoint and a gameplay standpoint. The same can't be said for the soundtrack. There are some really good tracks spread throughout the game, but the ones that stuck out the most were oddly not orchestra related at all, and one of my favourites you can only actually hear at your camp, and it's played via an NPC, and if you look it up, it's a whole new track with instrumentals, the lot, and I really liked it, and that was a thing I wasn't expecting when I played Days Gone, because so many people called the world dead, and in a lot of ways it is, but we'll get to that. But there are definitely certain bits of the world that definitely feels more alive than most open world games, like, well, mainly Ubisoft games, I can't lie, because they're really dead at the moment. But there are certain sections of the story when you transition to a different part of the map, or certain plot points happened where the music completely drowns out everything. There's no audio from the bikes or anything like that, and it's really beautiful, and I think it really works. But I don't know if it was intentionally done as many times as it is, especially during cutscenes, but it only really works half the time, unfortunately. I don't have much else to say about the soundtrack other than it's good and serviceable, but there is one glaring issue, and I've already mentioned it, and that's the mixing. The music is good, but there's too much music that drowns out the emotional moments of the story, clearly overpowering dialogue, and it's just not a very good thing to do. And it's very obviously not a stylistic choice on the game's part. What I mean is the music overpowers everything in cutscenes, and this is a serious issue. This is a very rare one as well, because either the person who mixed it hated the dialogue, or it was just a complacency thing again, but those little things tend to add up. The story of Days Gone, while clearly made with care, falls flat in multiple ways, mainly because of its pacing, dragging pretty much all of the other elements of the storytelling down with it. Days Gone is the perfect example of when a game's length needs to be cut, despite the care you've put into every element of the story. Days Gone is very similar to every other open world zombie game out there, with some slight differences with elements like traversal. Days Gone has a big focus on your bike. Everything you do slowly goes towards customizing your bike, and it sounds like a good idea if done right, but it is lackluster here. It's still really fun, and is definitely a breath of fresh air having to rely on one vehicle, so you're constantly aware of your surroundings and where you leave your bike, but I'll explain in just a minute why this element feels a little lackluster in the end. The open world is unfortunately a lot of tick box gameplay. Go to location, do activity, move on, repeat, with not a lot of variation. There are a few guns in the game, but many are locked once again until that 20-hour mark, so it really feels like it's limiting for most of the game, and that does not benefit it at all. The shooting mechanics themselves are actually pretty good. There is a lot more focus on patience, which is unusual for a game focused on the masses of gamers, because usually games like this, and the best example of this is GTA, have very easy shooting mechanics and don't have much variation apart from automatic or semi-automatic. But I am happy to say when you unlock these weapons, they do spice up the gameplay and eventually make you feel like an absolute boss when taking on the hordes of zombies you come across late in the game. For example, the pistol at the start of the game, you actually have to hold the trigger for, God, it feels like ages, like 5 seconds to fully aim in to get an accurate shot, and some people won't like that, but I think it adds to the intensity of the game, adds a bit more oomph to it, if you know what I mean, because when you're getting charged at by a bunch of guys and you start spamming and you're missing your every shot, you do start to lose your nerve, and you eventually learn the mechanics and you become a beast. I like that there's actually some sort of element of skill to it, even though it's a single player game. The open world is beautiful, but unfortunately the main missions for some reason push you away from exploring and keep you set on a linear path, and pretty much every open world game is guilty of this these days. Even with Rockstar, with Red Dead 2, every Ubisoft game ever, so I'm not going to hold this against Days Gone. I've just come to accept that this is what mainstream open world games are now, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. I don't get it, to be honest, because you've got these developers putting in so much time and effort into every corner of the world, and these maps are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and yet the story they're trying to tell, they don't incorporate any of it. And to explore the open world is kind of a waste of time in a lot of cases, because the side activities are just kind of pointless. However, mission design, if linear, has to be good, and it is just, for me, it's just too lackluster for my taste. I mentioned a group of humanity is experimenting on zombies earlier, and you discover this through stealth sections. Yes, there are forced stealth sections in a game that was advertised as a zombie horde shooter. So this was a surprise, but not a welcome one. I wouldn't have been that bothered if these missions were like a one-off and were designed well, but they just aren't. You follow someone Assassin's Creed style, listening to their conversation while using one-dimensional stealth mechanics, which just bored me to death, because I don't play giant horde zombie games for stealth. If I want to play a stealth game, I'll play a game designed with stealth in mind, so the mechanics do not suit the style of gameplay here at all, and I would say these moments are worse than the MJ missions in Spider-Man PS4, and that hurts to say. They're just way too long, way too boring mechanically, and it's just an eavesdropping mission that could be done in a cutscene, and it's just not worth it at all. I don't think they should be in the game. Progression is tied to main missions and the various side activities spread across the world, and in certain sections of the world you have bases, and each section has its own progression line, and as cool as that sounds, it really is there for padding. You spend 10 hours on one side of the map upgrading, grinding these areas, only to realize the best stuff you can't even access until you're almost 11 hours in, and to me that is just not respecting my time at all. I'm not kidding. These bases take hours and hours of time to level up, and the game pulls a 180 and tells you to do it all over again on the other side of the map, and I really don't like this. I really think the progression system should have been tied to just one upgrade path, and each safe area had the same upgrades, because I gave up after a while, because you have to travel to these different locations and the map is massive, so you have to keep going across this map while getting fuel, doing activities for specific bases, and then you have to go to a different base to unlock a bike upgrade, and you have to go back to the old base to upgrade a gun or something like that, and it just gets really tedious. Now, the deal breaker for many of you that have made it this far in the review, by the way, congrats, you actually have a really good attention span, the zombie hordes. This was used to advertise the game, and unfortunately these hordes don't appear until right at the end of the game. I'd say the last 5 hours of the game, and that is just jaw-dropping and not in a good sense. My whole time playing, on both my first and second playthrough, I was thinking, where are the hordes? Let me take on these hordes that were advertised, and when I finally got to the hordes, I was excited. And they didn't disappoint, they're a lot of fun. I just wish more of the game was focused on this aspect, as the hordes are easily the best part of the game. The problem is, and I keep saying problem, I'm sorry guys, but the problem is, once you get to these hordes, you're so leveled up, it becomes piss easy to take them out. You just run around and shoot, and that's it. The hordes are too easy because they're at the end of the game when most people are already done and just want the credits to roll. So the progression is limited by the pacing once again. The gunplay is fantastic when you finally get all the weapons, but that takes ages to do. The stealth is lackluster and boring. The open world is gorgeous but not capitalized on, and the main missions are very generic, limiting your creative ability. I still think this is a good game, but the pacing just drags it down so much. For most people, this game will be serviceable, fine, but for a guy who has to play game after game for this channel, it really was a slog to get through in the end. But I wanted to give Days Gone a chance, and I'm glad I did. I can see a lot of people enjoying themselves, especially with the hordes later on in the game, and for the average player that aspect will be great for them, and potentially you watching. But for me, it's a solid 6 out of 10. A great foundation for something that could have been phenomenal if a sequel was greenlit, but unfortunately, it wasn't. I do think you should buy Days Gone if you enjoy the open world genre, as long as you take into the fact that there is a lot of padding. Thank you for watching.